To welcome our mayor, Muriel Bowser. Washington, D.C. is very unique in the American political system. The mayor, D.C.'s chief executive, functions also as governor, county executive, as well as mayor. I guess mayor's your day job. And Mayor Bowser runs Medicaid. She issues driver's licenses and has tax authority. Like county executives, Mayor Bowser runs the local jail and, unlike most mayors, also oversees the public school system. In 2020, Washington, D.C. is home to 705,000 people across 68 square miles and has a AAA bond rating, which is no small achievement, and an annual budget of more than $15 billion. Mayor Bowser has doubled the district's annual investment in affordable housing and set a bold goal to build 36,000 new homes by 2025. The city has currently produced 22,327 total units, I'm sure it's more of that as of this morning, and 4,201 affordable units. So there's a lot of work to do, but a lot has been accomplished. Over the past 5 years, the district has invested more than $500 million into its Housing Production Trust Fund, which is more per capita than any other jurisdiction in the country. And the city has also expanded homeownership programs, invested in programs to make it easier for seniors to age in place, and created and funded a housing preservation fund. With more than 20 years of experience in local government, I will note that she first entered elected office as an advisory neighborhood commissioner and in the Riggs Park neighborhood. And so she's literally done every major elected job in the city, including city council. So welcome, Mayor Bowser, and I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to chat with you. Thanks so much. You can have a seat over here. So let's get right to it. I will note that Mayor Bowser and I are neighbors, and I expected that when I moved out to Orchid Street that the snow plows would be waiting the night before for the snow to come. But unfortunately, what I see instead is Mayor Bowser getting out in her SUV, making sure the snow plows are going all over the neighborhood. And so it's that one perk. I had to wait a few hours, but I appreciate what you do for the city in rain, sun, or snow.
Well, thank you.
So let's get right into it. We've come a long way in building affordable housing and reducing homelessness. When I do my presentation about homelessness around the country, I have all these pictures of homeless people in San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York, and the charts that show how much worse it's gotten. And the District of Columbia is always my example of what it should look like rather than what it does look like in other cities. So I know you've done a lot in reducing homelessness. We obviously have a long way to go. Tell us about some of the tools and tactics your administration has used to increase the supply of units and address rising prices in Washington, D.C., which don't just increase the economically homeless population, but really help drive people who've been here for so long out of the city because there's a reduction in affordable housing.
No, for sure. So first of all, let me thank everybody for discussing this very important issue and doing it right here in Washington. I was telling David as I was walking in, it's been a little while since I've been in this room, and I've been in this room 1,000 times. But it's just another example of how we're open and how the last 2 years we have been so modified in the way that we do everything. So it's great to see everyone here. And for us, housing affordability, I think it's our number one issue. That's what we hear across all 8 wards of Washington, D.C. That's what I heard for 9 straight months on the campaign trail. And I will say that issues around affordability are different, even when I ran 4 years ago or the 4 years before that. But even 8 years ago, we set out to make affordability the number one tenet of my time in service, because I could see then the pressures across the board and across the city on affordability. Housing being number one, but other areas too. Child care is another huge driver for costs for families. And it's the difference between whether people will stay or move from the District of Columbia. So I promised then that we would use our best tool, the Housing Production Trust Fund, increase it to make sure no matter what our taxes coming in were, we would always invest $100 million in the Housing Production Trust Fund. And that would allow our system of supporting the private development to be consistent and predictable. And the system then would be every year willing and able to find quality projects and to get them moving. So that's one of the biggest commitments that we've made, and I'm grateful that we've been able to keep that commitment every single year. And in fact, in the last two budget cycles, we have been able to go from a $100 million commitment to a $400 million commitment 2 years ago, and this year a $450 million commitment, which was finally approved by the council. So that level of commitment has allowed us to find great projects, to partner with the private sector to produce those projects and create a lot of affordable housing. I thought, however, that we had to be more systematic in it. We have, in our region, have tried to encourage everybody to do as much as we're doing because we know as the metropolitan Washington region, we're competing with other regions around the country. And this affordability issue has to be addressed to keep us competitive. And so one thing that we've done and we've encouraged the rest of the region to do is set a goal of how many units by 2025 and to do so by neighborhood. And so I think that's part of what has set us apart regionally and nationally in our commitment to affordability.
So what do you think are some of the hardest challenges you face? Because it's a lot of money, and yet sometimes it feels like we're running on a treadmill that keeps going faster.
It is. It feels that way sometimes, but just imagine if we hadn't been investing those dollars. Just imagine if we just left the market to its own devices and not be a partner in making sure that people of all incomes can find housing in the district. So while we have some catching up to do, I frequently tell people DC didn't become a high amenity city or I'm trying to make sure you can hear me. It just didn't happen overnight that we became where we had housing pressures. It's been building up over a number of years. So we know to keep affordability and affordable housing in the pipeline is important. But it's still only one side of the equation. We also have to focus on making sure people have good paying jobs so that they can afford the housing that we're producing. And we're very focused on that as well.
Yep, income is a big issue. You recently launched the Black Homeownership Strike Force to address racial disparities in homeownership and household wealth in the district. Can you tell us a little bit about that effort and what your plans are to help Black residents both stay in the city and come back to the city?
For sure. So we've been very focused on equalizing the number of Black homeowners in the district with their white neighbors. And because we know in our city that is the primary way that people build wealth is through home ownership. And so we know that we're either right at 50% or just over 50% home ownership in the white community and just at about 30, 32, 34% in the among African Americans in Washington. So equalizing that experience is very important to how we close the wealth gap in the city. And so we know the government has a role to play in that because the government had a role to play in some of the disparate treatment and disparate policies that are generations in the making. And so I have empaneled a strike force of professionals who are in industry, but also in community to really help us hone down on the program or policy that will help us equalize those home ownership rates. The strike force is meeting. They will meet throughout the summer, and hopefully by October 1st, I'll have a set of recommendations that we will be able to fund with the first $10 million in seed money for the Black Fund.
That's terrific. And, you know, we're often confronted with this issue of gentrification. And one of the things I always remind people is that really when we talk about gentrification, we're talking about two very different things. Investment, which we absolutely want, and displacement, which is the real problem. We want the people who live in our community to actually benefit from the investment that we're bringing into the community. And I was looking at some of the numbers, and displacement is a very real issue here. I mean, we have had in the census since 1980, we've lost 165,000 black residents. And so we want to be able to really protect the opportunity of our residents to benefit from the opportunities we're creating. But it's not easy. Can you talk a little bit about how you try to address that?
Well, I think you raise a interesting timeline, right? Because the issues about people moving now and the issues about people moving in the 1980s are very different. And sometimes people don't focus on that. But I like to tell the story of, you know, my own family who are Washingtonians, generational Washingtonians. And in that period of time in the 70s and 80s, a lot of people that had good paying jobs, frequently government jobs, who had good incomes in the 70s and 80s, what did they do? They left D.C. They left D.C. because of crime in schools. So to talk about the people leaving D.C. then is very different than talking about black Washingtonians who are leaving D.C. now. Because frequently people, they may think that they're leaving for crime or schools, but that's not the case in today's Washington. But it may be the case that they're leaving for bigger houses or cheaper rent. So we have to deal with those issues separately. In terms of investment in neighborhoods, I believe very strongly that neighborhoods get better or they decline. And so you have to constantly invest in a neighborhood to make sure that you have quality housing stock, that you have the amenities that people want, and that you're making, you have safe transportation and great schools. I tell my team frequently that our challenge, and this is part of the affordability discussion, is making sure that more DC neighborhoods are neighborhoods that people want to live in. Because when we do that, we increase how people feel about affording to live in the district. You follow me? So if people will tell me sometimes when we go past housing developments and they think that they're luxury new developments. And in fact, they probably have 30% affordability attached to them, but you can't see that, nor should you be able to see it. But somebody will say to me, well, I can't afford to live in that building. And I said, that may be true. I may not be able to afford to live there either, but there are so many other neighborhoods in Washington that we've invested in. They have a new grocery store, they have quality transportation, they have a great school, great parks. And so now these have become affordable neighborhoods because people can see themselves living there. So the investment in creating new units goes hand in hand with investing in neighborhoods.
I think that's a really good point. Investment makes a difference. You've mentioned the Black Homeownership Fund. You've got $40 million package of legacy initiatives.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the legacy initiatives are all focused, again, on affordability, some with housing, as we've talked about, one with Black Homeowners Fund. Another housing initiative relates to senior housing and senior homeowners and helping them afford their homes by not increasing their property taxes so much year to year. In other words, we had a 5% cap year to year that seniors property taxes couldn't go up. We were able to reduce that to a 2% cap. And so now that helps more seniors use those few $100s or $1,000 that they would have paid in property taxes on some other thing that they need to stay in their home. We invest in Safe at Home, which allows more seniors to age in place as well. And on the business side, we're talking about housing, but there's also this commercial affordability problem that was really laid bare during COVID. We could see really distinct differences in some businesses being able to weather the storm or even apply for some of the relief programs. And what our commercial acquisition fund allows is legacy businesses that have been doing business in the district for a time to apply for dollars from us to buy their buildings. And so now they're creating more equity in their business by paying for their own building other than paying rent. So there's a series of programs like this that we will continue to look at that in some ways we learned about more needs during the COVID relief process. And now we see this as a bigger opportunity to grow.
So you mentioned about food and grocery stores, and food deserts is such a big issue. And when we think about retaining people in the city, having a good place to buy groceries, having small businesses, they can, and Ward 8 is often, the example people look at. Tell us a little bit about the process of really creating these amenities in the communities that need it most.
Well, there are a lot of different ways to go at it. When I think about my time serving as the Ward 4 council member, we had 2 grocery stores for 80,000 people. Not much different than in Ward 8 right now, where there was one grocery store. There was one full-service grocery store when I became the mayor. And so my strategy in Ward 4, I've just really expanded across all 8 wards, and that was to focus neighborhood by neighborhood, use small area plans, work with the community to increase the amount of food offerings. It was also to look at the little guys versus the big guys and start there. Literally, our first, the first projects that I worked on with food in Ward 4 involved a Yes Organic Market. Some of you have heard about that. And a little neighborhood store called the Broad Branch Market. And the way that I helped them was to help them sell alcohol. Now, you may say, well, Muriel, we're talking about food, not alcohol. What are you talking about? But that's what it took for that little guy to be able to compete with some of the wine sellers to sell wine in their groceries. And that was just, what it taught me was, I'd rather take a bet on these little guys doing the right thing in their neighborhoods and hiring from their neighborhoods and putting fresh fruit where there was none than the other guys. And the fact is that the big guys are willing to take more risk, and they demonstrate to the big guys that it can be done. And so the strategy that we've deployed is, since I have been mayor, is to look at little food sellers that are doing well in one part of the city and partner with them to open up in Ward 8. And that's what we've done with a market called Good Foods Market. And in other cases, we have used a fund that we created with the council called the Food Access Fund, so that we can just kind of break up some problems that have existed in bringing development to tough to develop areas. So that's why we'll have a Lidl. And we just announced that Giant Food would open in Ward 8. So that's how it goes. But I approach the issue with food differently than some other people in office, because you will frequently hear, I never use the word, for the most part, food desert, because I see it as an opportunity to attract more food. And I don't see Ward 8 that different from Ward 4, because the truth is, 15 years ago, Ward 4 was Ward 8 with only 2 major grocers. And now we have, at least a dozen new food opportunities, because we work neighborhood by neighborhood and project by project. And we deployed a model that said, let's go with the little guys first, and then the big guys will come. but the district is going to be a partner every step of the way.
That's a fascinating strategy, and I have to say that you look at a lot of suburban markets around the country where they don't have, state control of liquor sales, and margins matter. And you see these grocery stores, they sell wine and beer, and it really makes a difference in terms of their ability to afford things like fresh vegetables, which have a much tighter margin. So that's really impressive. Let's talk a little bit about federal support. And you're a participating jurisdiction, as we say in the federal support area, PJ. Housing choice vouchers, home funds, these are really critical components of affordable housing. Mm-hmm. As a consumer of HUD's programs, tell us a little bit about, let's start with home funds, we'll get to vouchers, which are much harder second. But how do we, in those of us who are really trying to make a difference in national policy, make it easier for you as a consumer of these programs like home and CDBG to use these funds more effectively?
Oh, wow. What a great question. I could probably write you a memo about that.
You should.
I should write you a memo. And first of all, we're grateful that the attention that Secretary Fudge has given to cities, and I feel a kindred spirit with her because she was a mayor.
That's right.
She gets mayors. The Biden administration has been very good about bypassing the states to get to mayors, which is, not an issue for us. But my fellow mayors across America, they're like, yes, they really, if they can bypass their states, that is something good. So while I don't have anything specific to say about home right now, or the home funds, we just like flexibility. That's probably the biggest thing. Sometimes with HUD, you'll have something where you can use it for housing, but if it has retail, you can't use it. Well, so we want the maximum flexibility with all of the funds that we get, and we want more.
More is good.
More is always good.
We're all for more.
Yeah,
My number is more.
We want more. And even beyond that, we for public housing, we're really engaged in how to make it better and how to make it better faster. And we know that the federal government is kind of retreated from its role in that process. We would like them to lean in a little bit more. And we have, I think, about 6,000 units of public housing. We're approaching, between our federal and local vouchers, I think we're approaching like 19,000 vouchers in the mix. So we have a lot of resources that are supported by the federal government, but I think we will always ask for more flexibility.
And let's talk about vouchers, because it's often covered in the papers, the length of the wait list. Getting on the wait list is so hard. Years and decades, the people have waited on wait lists. This is a problem all over the country. It's really a challenge. We don't have enough vouchers, and it's hard for people to get vouchers to be used. And we talked about that a little earlier. Tell us from your perspective, what do we need to be doing in terms of the voucher program to make it more impactful in the city?
Well, we have a lot of vouchers in circulation, and the Housing Authority, some years ago, almost 10 years ago, I think, kind of got away from this idea about an ever-increasing wait list for vouchers. We know, for the most part, vouchers are, once you get one, you have one. So we have to think about, we've thought about ways for families, for example, to be able to get training and get work and still have some level of their housing and child care benefits, for example. Because there's not usually a time where you have a voucher and then you come back and turn it in and somebody else uses the voucher. It's just that the numbers just go up and up of voucher use. So that is why we have created some other programs, including our rapid rehousing programs that is used for rental assistance in emergencies, or used for rental assistance while you're doing your training in workforce development. And so that's part of what we do. Now, you've asked about how do we get people with vouchers in places faster. that is a whole nother avenue of work that I don't think many get the complexity of, that don't do this work every day. But taking someone who may be having an emergency, may have mental health, substance abuse, put a voucher in their hand, that's like, you might as well have kept it, right? So they need a handhold all the way through the entire process, and supportive services once they're placed in housing. So that's a big thing. Then there's another category of people who are having an economic emergency, or the only thing they need is that voucher, and they're going to be okay. And that person is going to be much more able and motivated to get to the process of getting it. And then we have to have affordable housing at the end. We come back. Without affordable housing and a constant production of safe and affordable housing, then that process of getting somebody in a voucher is just increasingly hard. So we have had a lot of focus on working with our landlord community, our housing provider community, to make sure that the district can be a good partner, and that's all of our agencies, from the Housing Authority, who's making the voucher allocation, to all of our supportive services that give our folks a better chance of making it once they're in housing.
So I'll wrap up by looking forward. You've just won your primary.
Yes.
Not a small thing.
Thank you. Not at all.
A lot of support here. We're nonpartisan. You also have your general election in the fall, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say you may be looking at planning for a third term. What's next in terms of housing? What do we need to do? You've got you may have 4 years.
Yep.
That's a long time, but it goes by very quickly.
Yes, it does go by fast. I think we're looking for, we've been able to do this with housing, right? We can make incremental increases. We've added a lot of money. The money's buying less and less as we move forward. So I think that we need to be, all of us, thinking of if we've been doing like this for 7 years, how do we do like this? Mm-hmm. What is the thing that takes us from incremental changes to some huge changes? So I think some of that is innovation. Some of that is thinking differently about how and where we build, how high we build, and also just thinking about how people will live differently. And so I think it's been easy for us to think about, young people being in shared housing. But what about older people being in shared housing? What about people who are working remotely, permanently? Their job may be based in California, but now they're living here. We see that as a growth area for us in terms of our residents. So how are they living differently? So I think that it's going to take some innovation around our building practices, pushing the needle more than we have, I think, on how, where, and how we build is going to be important. And also being very, very focused on saying, this is who lives here, this is who wants to continue to live here. How can we support getting more out of our housing with the population that we have? So I'm looking for, with all of your help, that next big thing that takes the level of production up.
Well, we're here for you.
All right.
We're looking forward to working with you, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.